When we think about the Middle Ages, we usually think about a very dark and negative time for humanity. But it was really that bad? Yes. Yes, it was. There are many ways for us to measure something, and the Dark Ages can be easily measured by its disgraces. For nearly 1,000 years, much of the world lived through an era defined by instability, violence, disease, and constant uncertainty. From the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century to the dawn of the Renaissance in the 15th century, the medieval world endured a long sequence of crises that shaped the lives of millions. The medieval world were not simply a time of castles and knights. They were also an age of war, famine, plague, invasion, and fragile societies struggling to survive. War was one of the defining features of medieval life. Kingdoms were fragile, borders shifted constantly, and political power was often decided on the battlefield. There is no way to know the exact number of wars fought during the Middle Ages. There were hundreds, maybe even thousands. Such a happy time. So it is impossible to talk about all of them in this video, but we can surely highlight the more important ones. One of the longest and most devastating conflicts of the medieval world was the Hundred Years' War between England and France. Despite its name, this war lasted over a century and devastated large regions of France. Armies marched across the countryside, villages burned, crops destroyed, and civilian populations forced to flee. Battles such as Battle of Crécy and Battle of Agincourt demonstrated the deadly efficiency of medieval warfare. Longbowmen, armored knights, and disciplined infantry fought in brutal encounters where thousands could die in a single day. Thousands on a single day. And it's only one war. Don't worry, there's way more to come. Which brings us to one of the most famous sets of wars, the Crusades. Across Europe and the Mediterranean, religious wars known as the Crusades reshaped entire regions. One of the most prominent reasons for this event were to contain the expansion of the Muslim Empire. The First Crusades saw armies of European knights marched thousands of kilometers to the Middle East in an attempt to capture Jerusalem. Cities were besieged, populations massacred, and entire kingdoms rose and fell during these campaigns. Later crusades, including the Third Crusade and the Fourth Crusade, continued this cycle of warfare, often with devastating consequences. Meanwhile, England itself faced violent internal conflicts during the War of the Roses, a dynastic struggle that plunged the country into decades of civil war. And even outside Europe, empires clashed for dominance. The Byzantine Empire fought long and desperate wars against rising powers such as the Ottoman Turks, culminating in the dramatic fall of Constantinople, which marked the end of the Byzantine world. And even if wars were already blooming across the world, there were other external problems. As kingdoms struggled, external invasions also reshaped the medieval world. From the north came the Vikings. Beginning in the 8th century, Scandinavian raiders attacked coastal settlements across Europe. Monasteries were burned, towns looted, and entire regions destabilized. From the east came another devastating force, the Mongols. The Mongol conquests created the largest contiguous land empire in history. Cities that resisted Mongol armies often faced total destruction. Entire populations were massacred, and once prosperous urban centers were left in ruins. The shock of Mongol invasions reshaped Eurasia and permanently altered the balance of power across Asia and Eastern Europe. Oh, they also killed 10% of the world population. If war was a constant threat, disease was an even greater one. The most devastating epidemic in medieval history was the Black Death. Arriving in Europe in 1347, the plague spread with terrifying speed. Within just a few years, it killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population of Europe. Cities were overwhelmed with death. Entire villages disappeared.
Graveyards filled faster than bodies could be buried. Doctors had little understanding of disease. Treatments ranged from herbal remedies to bloodletting, and in many cases, physicians themselves became victims of the plague. The psychological impact was enormous. Many people believed the plague was divine punishment, while others blamed minority communities or supernatural forces. The result was fear, panic, and social breakdown across much of Europe. Even before the Black Death, medieval societies faced another deadly threat: famine. Agriculture depended heavily on stable weather and successful harvests. When crops failed, entire populations could face starvation. One of the most severe crises occurred during the Great Famine of 1315 through 1317. Years of cold weather and relentless rain destroyed harvests across northern Europe. Food shortages became widespread. Peasants were forced to eat seeds meant for planting, weakening future harvests. Livestock died, food prices soared, and malnutrition spread rapidly. Millions died during this famine, leaving populations weakened and vulnerable just decades before the arrival of the Black Death.
One of the principal causes of disease were the complete lack of sanitation and hygiene in the Middle Ages, which prompted a lot of deaths. Life in medieval cities was harsh and unsanitary. Streets were often narrow, crowded, and filled with waste. Garbage and animal remains were frequently thrown into public streets. Human waste was sometimes dumped from upper windows into open drains below. Clean water was difficult to obtain, and contamination was common. These conditions made cities perfect environments for the spread of disease. Rats and fleas thrived in crowded urban environments, helping diseases like the plague spread even faster. For most people living in medieval towns, hygiene and sanitation were luxuries rarely available. And even if all that weren't enough, medieval society was organized through the feudal system. At the top were kings and nobles who controlled land and armies. Below them were knights and minor lords who governed local territories. At the bottom were peasants and serfs who worked the land and produced food. For peasants, life was especially difficult. They faced heavy taxes, forced labor, and little opportunity to improve their social status. Bad harvests, war, or disease could destroy an entire community within a single generation. Despite its hardships, the medieval world was not only defined by suffering. This period also saw the rise of universities, the growth of cities, and the development of remarkable architecture, such as Gothic cathedrals. Trade expanded across continents, and new ideas slowly began to transform society. By the 15th century, technological innovations, economic change, and cultural developments were beginning to reshape Europe. These changes would eventually lead to the Renaissance and the early modern world. But for centuries before that transformation, life in the medieval era remained uncertain and often brutal. The medieval ages were not simply an age of castles and knights. They were a time when war, plague, famine, and hardships shaped the daily lives of millions. And understanding these realities helps reveal the true story of one of the most dramatic periods in human history. That thankfully, we don't live in it.